The images for our block nodes will obviously be added to our asset catalog. And I am already in my asset catalog in my project here. You do have all the images I will use in the resource folder, and you could download it in the course, but you are always welcome, more than welcome to use them, even in games that you want to publish and or sell. But if you do have your own graphics, you can use those too, of course. I now want to drag in the 6 images for wood, stone, and glass, each in a whole version and a slightly damaged version. Let's add both of these versions into my asset catalog. And to make this a little more tidy, I will right-click on these 6 files then and select New Folder from Selection, which will pack these files in a folder, which I will just call Blocks. Once again, this folder does not really change anything, but it keeps our project a little less cluttered and makes finding stuff much easier. Now that I have my graphics, I want to go back to my block class, which I will now slightly modify. Actually, we don't have to change that much here since we did implement the class already, knowing that we will sooner or later need to add images for the sprites. But still, I will start in my initializer, where I will, below my damage threshold and above the superclass initializer, create a new constant called texture. It will be set to a skTexture, which I will initialize with an image name. We do have the raw values, wood, stone, and glass as strings in our block type property of the node, which conveniently also happens to be the exact names of the images we've just added. What a lucky coincidence. This means that we can just initialize our texture depending on the type of my block node by passing type.rawValue for the name of the texture image. If our type here would then be wood, for example, the texture would be our wood image from the asset catalog. This texture will then be used for our superclass initializer, where I can set it as the texture for the new node. The color will obviously stay clear and the size will stay at 0, since we do set it in the game scene when we know what it is exactly from our placeholder node. There is one more thing that I want to change here, and that is in our impact method, where we, as of now, when the health tanked below our threshold, just colored our node red. Since we do now have textures, I want to replace my whole texture with a broken one. To do so, I will set a constant broken texture and initialize it as an skTexture with the image named initializer. I will again write type.rawValue, which again would be either wood, stone, or glass. Now I want to just append the string broken to its name, which are now the images that we've added to the assets that are slightly damaged. Then I will set the texture property of the node to this new broken texture to exchange the image. I can then go back to my GameScene class, where I will go to the method where we added our blocks. If you remember correctly, we did this in setup level, and there we will check if we need to change anything for our actual texture nodes. We do iterate over the child nodes and try to cast them as sprite nodes. We then check if the name of the child node is either wood, stone, or glass. And if that is the case, we initialize the appropriate block node. We then set size, position, and Z position. And all of this can stay the way it is. The next line, we did set a color for our simple sprite, which we will now not need anymore, since we do have a texture set. So let's just delete this line. We then create the physics body and add the node, which again can stay. The next line will now be slightly modified, since we are now going to add the actual images in our scene editor as placeholders. So I want to, as soon as the placeholder was replaced, remove the placeholder by writing child.remove from parent, so that the nodes we are going to place as placeholders to pass the size and position for our actual nodes are removed as soon as we don't need them anymore. Alright, that would be it for the prerequisites, and we can go to our game scene file where we are now going to add some actual blocks to build an actual small level. To start, I will just delete the sprite node we currently have in here. And I can now, if I click on this rightmost symbol in the inspector pane that says show the media library, see all my images from the asset catalog. Among others, we have our stone, wood, and glass blocks. I will now, of course, use the whole versions of them to build a small structure in my scene, beginning by dragging a stone block onto my map here. I can then move them around and position them how I want them. If I zoom in more, I can do this more accurately, so it might be a good idea to do so. So let's just add some nodes and position them right next to each other, like so maybe. It is really convenient that we have this kind of magnetic system with the lines that get drawn as I move stuff around, since this really helps in positioning the nodes properly. Now let's maybe add some wooden blocks. I can also easily turn the blocks by, in the attributes inspector, for the rotation value, maybe enter 90 degrees, so it is now standing up like this. I can also, while holding down the Alt key, just duplicate nodes like this and then add them to the scene, so all that is really easy and convenient for us. Maybe we should also add a glass node just to make sure that everything works. I'm gonna position it here, right in the middle. This level is obviously just for demonstration purposes, and I just want to check if all that we've implemented works as planned. It is important for us to actually add all these nodes as children to our map node, so that we can actually access them in the for loop in the setup scene method in the game scene. So let's select them all and drag them up to make them children of the time map node. We will also name our nodes appropriately so that they get the right type. I'll select my 3 stone nodes and they will get the name stone. Next are the 4 wooden blocks, which will be called wood. And finally our 1 glass block, which will obviously be called glass. Alright, we have some nodes in our level now, and their names should make sure they get properly replaced in the game scene so that we can really impact them with our bird. So let's run the app and take a look. I once again use an actual device to make sure our frame rate is smooth, and we can really test this. If all this works, I should see my 8 nodes with their different materials, and then like before, I should be able to launch our bird into them. Alright, the app started, and if I zoom out, I can already see the blocks. Unfortunately, all of our blocks are currently flat and not rotated like we added them in the editor. So maybe we should take another look at how we add the nodes in our game scene and if we can fix this. In the scene editor here, we have just rotated our placeholder nodes by 90 degrees so that they stand up. In the actual game, however, this was not reflected. So let's go back to the game scene in the setup level method and the for loop. Right here, where we set the size, position, and Z position. I will now also add a line that copies the placeholder's rotation to our new block node. In SpriteKit, I can do that by setting block.zrotation, which I will set to child.zrotation, obviously, and this will fix this small error for our scene. So let's restart the app. Okay, we can now see that our change was effective and our nodes are now displayed correctly. Just like before, I can influence them with the birds and interact with them. So that is already set up pretty well. Okay, wonderful. We now have added actual images or textures for our blocks, which already looks pretty cool. We do now naturally also want to add an image or different images for our bird, since it is still looking pretty lame, just being a colored square. You do have the images for our bird nodes in the resource folder. So if you think you can handle it, why don't you try to implement setting a texture for our birds on your own? They do not need to be animated with the different frames that the image folders contain, but maybe just a static texture for the nodes. We will implement the animation together, since we did not really do this in this course before in any game. But using a static texture for a node should be something you might be able to already achieve on your own. So good luck!